My grandfather, Leland Sparks, was born in Batesville, Mississippi on December 4, 1930. He was the fifth of 8 children born to my great-grandparents Bennett and Bertha Sparks. As an African-American born in the South, my grandfather has lived through much of our country's struggle with racism and civil rights. His mother and father worked as tenant farmers. During the Great Depression, my grandfather's family was relatively unaffected. As tenant farmers, they were able to run a self-sustaining farm that provided food and shelter for the family. As a young boy, he helped on the farm and attended segregated schools. Because he was the youngest son, he was able to attend school while his older brothers both were needed to work on the farm. My grandfather vividly remembers the vast difference between the white schools and the black schools, noting that besides the quality of the schools, the black schools did not get to do all the same activities that the white schools did. Also, his school did not have its own track or gymnasium. One of the earliest historical events that my grandfather recalls was listening to the news of the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941 on the radio.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
Pearl Harbor was a significant event for my grandfather because his older brother Bernard was now serving in the Navy and was sent to Pearl Harbor after the bombing. 4 years later, my grandfather celebrated the end of World War II following the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As a 15-year-old, he was quickly approaching the eligible age for the draft. As the best athlete in the family, my grandfather was inspired by Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier in Major League Baseball on April 15, 1947. Leland himself would later play semi-pro baseball for the Los Angeles Rays and was once invited to the Baltimore Orioles spring training tryouts. During the Korean War, Leland served as a staff sergeant in the same segregated platoon as Willie Mays. Not only did Willie borrow Leland's car, but also stole his girlfriend. My grandfather was stationed at Fort Eustis, Virginia for basic training, and was later sent to places such as Greenland and Alaska. Mays later returned to the New York Giants in 1954 to win the MVP, National League pennant, and the World Series all in the same year. Following his service in the Army, Leland moved to Los Angeles, California, where his parents had already relocated. Because of the racial tension in the South and the new opportunities towards the West, my grandfather felt lucky to leave. In February 1957, my grandfather married my grandmother, Dorothy Mae Flowers, who had also moved to California from the South. They soon had their first child, my Uncle Darrell, in 1958, followed by my father, Donald Sparks, in 1961. My grandfather left the South just at the right time because violence and tension started to increase, and the 60s marked the start of the Civil Rights Movement. In 1963, Leland and a friend drove across the country to join in the March on Washington. There he witnessed Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
Back in California, Leland remembers the Watts riots of 1965. He said that they were both good and bad. It brought attention to how blacks were being treated by the police, but people were burning their own neighborhoods, destroying homes and businesses. My grandfather also remembers the tragic assassinations of MLK, Medgar Evers, President Kennedy, and his brother Bobby. It was horrible. I felt awful that these people, who were trying to make a difference, were the ones that paid the ultimate price. A bright part of the 60s, Leland remembers Neil Armstrong walking on the moon on July 20th, 1969. It was amazing to see a man walk on the moon. In the 1970s, my grandfather was elated when his stepdaughter Joyce and then my father enrolled in college. While in college, my dad met my mom at the University of Arizona. They are married in 1989, and later in 1997, I was born. 1997 also included a historical milestone in professional golf when Tiger Woods won the Masters. Tiger was the first person of color to win the Masters. My grandfather, a huge sports fan and avid golfer, was especially proud remembering that blacks were not always invited to play at Augusta. In 2008, my grandfather saw the first black president elected. He was excited to see Barack Obama take office, saying, "I didn't think I would ever live long enough to see the first black president. I was elated, jubilant, like I could walk on the moon." Today, after growing up in the segregated South, Leland Sparks feels that there is no place in the world that he can't go.